if you're someone who hates hearing people say something like they don't trust mainstream media, then this episode of the McTaggart Attack Podcast is for you. I'm Kevin McTaggart, stand-up comedian who lives in Vermont, and I talk about things in my podcast each day, Monday through Friday, where I try to entertain, educate, inform, motivate, something, whatever. If I find it interesting, if I want to talk about it, I'm going to talk about it here on the McTaggart Attack Podcast. You're either watching this right now, and if that's the case, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like the episode, hit the like button. If you don't like the if you don't like the episode, hit the thumbs down button. Tell me why you didn't like the episode in the comments, or tell me why you liked the episode in the comments. I want to see comments, basically what I'm saying. And if you're listening to this, thank you. Go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review wherever the hell you're listening to this. That would be appreciated, especially if you're listening to it on Apple Podcasts. I've noticed a lot of downloads on Apple Podcasts. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review, because that gets the podcast noticed more. And if it gets noticed more, then I could possibly make some money off of this thing. So we'll see about that. So all that obligatory call to action stuff out of the way, even though I hate call to action stuff, but I've talked about that before. So let's just move on. I was in a Zoom comedy show the other day, and one of the participants in the Zoom comedy show talked about the mainstream media. Oh, the mainstream media wants you to do this, and it just got me thinking, because it just sort of irked me to hear that, and I realized that it does irk me whenever I see people like criticize the mainstream media. Not that I'm a proponent of the mainstream media. I'm just like, I just wonder why they do it. Like, I just question their reasoning for hating on the mainstream media. I looked up what mainstream media meant, because I had a good idea and I was right about what it is. Mainstream media, if you're not aware, is just major newspapers, or there are news companies now, and there are merged news companies. Like, I think I saw something on Wikipedia about the Big Five, how it's like Disney, Comcast, News Corp, which includes Fox, there's Warner Media, and Viacom. Those are the big five companies that own a lot of the mainstream media. That's what's considered mainstream media. Everything else is alternative media. Like, someone runs their own newspaper that's not owned by a huge company. If you run your own newspaper, if you put out your own newspaper, I suppose me putting out my podcast and explaining things is considered alternative media. Because I've done that before on my podcast. I've tried to explain things. I've explained things like Antifa or systemic racism, and other stuff that I've tried to explain. That's one thing I try to do on this podcast, is explain stuff that I don't know what it is in the first place. And I did the podcast episodes to educate myself on them, and I hope that people get educated on what I found out. I'm not trying to completely educate you on it, just shine the light a little bit. You can go ahead and educate yourself more. But I'm sick and tired of hearing people talk about how they don't trust the mainstream media. And it just made me think, well, what media are you reading? What media are you paying attention to? Like, is it a small time newspaper with no credible sources? Um is it some podcast on the internet that you're getting your information from? Is it your crazy neighbor from across the road? Is your crazy neighbor from across the road the one where you get all of your news from? Where because he gets it from one of his cows or something like that. Is that where you're getting your news from? If you're not trusting mainstream media, if you can't trust the mainstream media, I mean, I'm not saying that you can't trust the mainstream media or that you can trust the mainstream media for that matter, but I'm just like, if you're just gonna obligatorily not trust the mainstream media at all, not just forget it, just because of how they just usually just put out the prevailing thoughts, that's fine, that's go ahead. But I'm like, don't you find yourself agreeing with the mainstream media sometimes? Like, are you just against the mainstream media just to be contrarian? I mean, I get that. I respect people actually who don't trust the mainstream media, but I feel like there are some people who just blatantly don't want to trust it at all just because. No, you're not going to tell me what to believe. You're not going to tell me what's going on, even though it's crazy. Even though most of the time I think the mainstream media is right. It's just that there's people out there that don't want to trust the mainstream media, and I feel like there are more people out there now that don't want to trust the mainstream media because since 2015, since he's been running for president and since he's been president, all Donald Trump does is accuse any news organization or any news media that makes him look bad as fake news. That's all he does. Anyone that makes him look bad, anyone that puts him in a negative light, he calls it fake news because it discredits them if he says fake news. Lots of people value his opinion for some fucked up reason. They value his opinion. So when he says that like CNN is fake news or the New York Times is fake news or such and such is fake news, the McTaggart Attack Podcast is fake news, people are going to assume that it's fake, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to trust the mainstream media or the lamestream media as people call it. I'm just like, it's the mainstream media for a reason. Yes, they're huge corporations, but not all corporations are bad. Would you rather get your news from a mom and pop newspaper where they print it themselves and write the stories based on stuff that the birds from the fucking windows are telling them? No. I would want to get news from reporters who go out there to get the facts and find out what's going on and then report those facts back and put them in, news reports and whatnot. That's what I want my news from. And if that's from a corporation that bought that news network or that newspaper or whatever, and whatever, as long as the news is credible, as long as it's from like a credible source, as long as it's from someone who actually went out and did the work to find that news. I don't care if they worked for a corporation or not. I hate these people who are so anti-corporate. Not all corporations are bad. Not all of them are good either, but I'm just like, people just have it stuck in their heads that corporations are out to get us, and it's just fucking irritating. And Trump is just a huge reason for that in recent years with his whole fake news mantra that he seems to go on whenever someone makes him look bad, which makes other people use that philosophy too, and it's just ruining media in general, because it's like we can't trust anything. But then again, you shouldn't trust anything. You should like not just read the title of an article. You should actually read the article. You shouldn't just see the title of the video. You should watch the video to see what information they give you, because a lot of times the titles can be misleading. You should research for yourself. I'm not saying that you should just believe what media tells you, but like to blatantly be like not wanting to trust the mainstream media just because is just a stupid thing to do. See what they have to say. Compare it to other stuff. Like, do your own research. Absolutely. But I'm just like, the mainstream media is not bad. I don't think the mainstream media is evil. It's not out there to like ruin your lives. It's out there to give as much information as they can. Is it skewed sometimes? Is it somewhat opinionated? Sure. I mean, but watch whatever news that makes you feel good is what I'm trying to say. But don't just discredit any news that you don't like as dumb. I also feel like anyone who... I feel the snarky part of me, which is most of me, makes me think that anyone who says that the mainstream media shouldn't be trusted doesn't even know what the mainstream media is. I just think they're so stupid that they just refuse to believe what the mainstream media actually is. It's just frustrating to hear stupid people out there who say, "Oh, I don't trust the mainstream media." Why don't you trust the mainstream media? Because I'd rather watch Fox News. Wait, so you'd rather watch Fox News because you hate the mainstream media, but what you don't understand is that Fox News is mainstream media. Yeah, it is. It is. So what are you going to do? You're going to watch OWN instead, right? Or something like that. Those are probably not mainstream media. They're probably owned by somebody else. But I'm just like, don't be one of those people that says, I hate the mainstream media. I watch Fox. You're still paying attention. You're still watching mainstream media, even if you're watching Fox. Fox is mainstream media. I think I burst some people's bubbles with that statement right there. I feel like that's what it is. I feel like people think that it's just that the mainstream media is just liberal media, but it's not. It's both liberal and conservative, mostly liberal. But it's becoming. I'm thinking mainstream media may become more balanced in the near future. But like, don't just think that mainstream media is liberal. But just like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust, that you should, I'm not saying that you should trust mainstream media, but you shouldn't just flat out not trust it. Do some research on your own first, so that you know what's going on with it. I'll admit that I don't necessarily do that. I watch CNN most of the time because they make me feel good about it. MSNBC is a bit too liberal for me, and Fox News, I don't want anything to do with them. So, like, just find whatever network makes you feel good. And CNN makes me feel good, even though I don't trust them some of the times, because I feel like they try to scare the crap out of me, so I don't really watch CNN most of the time. Once it starts making me feel bad about stuff or scare me about things, I turn it the fuck off. The news shouldn't scare you. I hate that the news scares you. But that's not what this podcast episode was about. This episode was about those people who are so stupid that they just say, you shouldn't trust mainstream media. Or they say mainstream media, and the way that they say mainstream media, they mean it in like the meanest way possible. They mean it as like a curse word when they say mainstream media. Just like those people who say Obamacare. They're just using it as a bad word or a bad phrase. Like it's a bad thing to say, mainstream media, when it's not a bad thing to say. You just think that you're smarter by saying that you don't trust mainstream media, but you're actually stupider for saying that you don't trust mainstream media. And that's the bottom line if you smell what the McTaggart Attack Podcast is cooking.